So we've now finished with all the boring videos in this course. It's time to learn some actual useful information that will help us better understand what exactly we'll be doing and how exactly those systems work that we'll be using to access the deep web. In this video, we're going to be talking about the Tor browser, and we're going to get an idea of how the onion routing concept works and how Tor connects you to other people anonymously. So before we dive into understanding how Tor and the Tor network works, we want to first understand the regular internet. Now, when talking about the regular internet, it's often represented as a cloud. However, this isn't really an accurate representation of how connections on the internet work. A better representation of the internet would be a straight line. This line is composed of a lot of things, everything from copper cabling to fiber optics to cell phone towers or even satellite networks. But essentially everything is connected on this one singular line. Now, the internet is useful because it allows two computers, or in this case servers, talk to each other across vast distances very fast. On those servers there, you'll find a hard drive, and on those hard drive you'll find folders or files, and those are what are transferred between the computers on the internet. Now, each server has its own unique address. Compared to how your home has its own address for mail to get to, every computer or server connected to the internet also has its own address. This is called an IP address. You'll know a website or service by its URL. That would be like www.google.com. However, your computer and your browser and your internet service provider, they all only care about one thing, and that is that IP address, while you may only care about that actual URL. It's important to note also that every URL does have an IP address behind it, connecting it to the internet. So when you're connecting to the internet, the process is pretty straightforward. You can use your computer to connect to www.randomsite.org or .com, or you can use your computer to connect to someone else's computer, and they can use their own computer to connect to Google. It's pretty useful because it just allows people to be interconnected and allows you to send data very fast over vast distances. Now, when connecting to the internet, it's important to note that your computer doesn't actually connect straight to the internet. You first connect to a router at your home, a router or modem if you have one, and that router connects you to your actual internet service provider. This would be like Cox or CenturyLink here in the US. Worldwide, there are obviously many internet service providers, but just pick whichever one you pay your internet bill to, and that's the one that ultimately connects you to the actual internet. From there, your data gets routed where it's supposed to, and it gets what it needs, and then it'll come back through the same way, coming back through your ISP, then your router, and then back to your computer. Now, when information is sent over the internet, it's not sent as one piece, rather piece by piece, and then reassembled on the other side and made sense of. But that's just an overview of the internet. Now we want to see how the Tor browser works, and it uses all of these concepts but adds a spin to each one in the way you connect to the internet. Before we dive into it, let's just clarify exactly what Tor is. Tor is a proxy used to anonymize your communication on the internet. When used with the Tor browser bundle, which is what we'll be using in this course, it is very secure, and together they create the ultimate anonymity tool for browsing the internet. To send all your data over the internet, Tor uses what is called onion routing, which we'll dive a bit into later in this course. And it is the largest tool used in the world to anonymously connect and browse the internet. So it's important to note that, of course, this process of you connecting to your router and then internet service provider is always present. We're going to take out those two steps, though, just to help put more things on the screen. But always note that there isn't a direct connection from your computer to the internet. There's always that middleman in between connecting you to the actual internet. So when connecting using Tor, you don't go straight from your computer to the actual website or dark web service in this case that you're trying to connect to. You go through what are called Tor nodes. So of course you can't directly connect to the dark web service. You'll first have to connect to the Tor servers and download a list of all the available Tor nodes on your network. Your Tor browser or Tor proxy will then use some math to actually figure out which way it will connect, and it'll begin connecting to those nodes one at a time. It'll send your data to the first node, and that first node will then send your data to the second node, and then the second node to the third. There is always a minimum of 3 connections in a Tor network, and they try to always aim for 3 and no more than 3, as any more than 3 or any less can be vulnerable to interception or different flaws. So of course, from your last node, it actually fully connects to the dark web service, and then the data will go all the way back from the dark web service in descending order 3, 2, 1 of the nodes back to your computer. Now, all of these things here are the Tor nodes or Tor services, and they will require that they have special tools on them to let people connect to them or go through them. But you can see here that a Tor node can be anything that is set up to be a Tor node. You can run a Tor node from your house. However, you're not going to be able to actually understand any of the data going through because it is encrypted and protected. So let's look at it in a different way to better understand the concept of connecting to these Tor nodes. Here we have the Tor network, which is comprised of a bunch of different machines that are running themselves as Tor nodes. Obviously, your computer's first step here is to connect to the Tor network and get the latest list of Tor nodes available. And that's a red arrow there representing that your connection to the Tor network is not secure. Your internet service provider or anyone else snooping on your data you're sending can see that you are connecting to the Tor network and understand what you're trying to get. From there, your connection comes back to your computer, and then it begins to enter the Tor network and go to your dark web service. Obviously, the first connection and the last connection into the Tor network are not secure. However, each step of the way is secure to help mitigate any chance of threats coming to you or your computer. Once it goes to the dark web service, that connection will head straight back to your computer in the same fashion and is secured the same way. Now, I'd like to note here that while it was a straight line in the last example, the Tor network can select any path it wants through the nodes. It can go to anyone for first one, anyone for a second one, and anyone for a third one. There's some differences there, though. It can't just enter any node first. The first node does have to be what's called an entry node, and we won't go too much into the specifics behind that. But just know that there are thousands of Tor nodes available across the world, so your connection almost every time will be different and anonymous. Now, looking at the previous example we used of this Tor connection, you can see that there are some pretty big vulnerabilities when it comes to this Tor connection, and that is when you're first entering the network or first exiting the network. This is why even while using Tor, you never want to send personally identifiable information, nothing like your address or name. If you want to be the most secure possible, you shouldn't post anything like that or log in using normal websites or normal email using Tor, because that actually makes you not anonymous and can cause risk to you being found out. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to get around those vulnerabilities, but one of the main ways people use is actually using HTTPS encryption, which is a two-end encryption used on most websites. That's when you look at their the name at the top there and you see that little green lock next to the website name. That just means they're using that encryption type to better secure the data you send. So this way of Tor connecting through different nodes or connecting your computer through different nodes before getting to its actual destination is why it's called onion routing, because it adds these layers of encryption. Now, it's not an actual onion. Obviously, it looks more something like this if it was illustrated, and we won't dive too much into how onion routing works or the methods used behind the encryption, because this course, it's only focusing on the basics of these concepts. We don't want to dive too deep into anything too technical, but if you'd like to learn more, of course, there are plenty of other learning and resources on deepwebacademy.com. Hopefully that video sheds some more light on the idea behind Tor and how it connects you anonymously to the internet. In the next video, we're going to be talking about PGP, which I've mentioned a few times in this course. And we're going to talk about how that is very important, especially when using Tor if you ever want to send anything that's personally identifiable, like your name, address, or anything else. So go ahead and head to the next video to learn a little bit more about PGP.